beginning it was a mess, but when we managed to get this away, to clean out the samples, we got really pure DNA to manage to tell something about him, and especially about his ancestry.
Scientists drilled into ancient bone to pull out a secret that was meant to stay lost forever. They were looking at two tiny babies buried with King Tut.
Why these two baby mummies were laid to rest with their father in the tomb of Tutankhamun.
And what they found blew the lid off a massive cover-up. Egypt tried to erase this part of history, but the genes do not lie. This discovery rewrites the life of the most famous pharaoh to ever live. Basically, the story of King Tut is a tragedy that science is only now starting to understand. The secret is about a doomed bloodline and a family scandal. Hidden daughters of the boy king. When Howard Carter first walked into the tomb of King Tut in 1922, the world only cared about the gold. There were over 5,000 items packed into the small rooms. People saw golden chariots and fancy chairs and the famous mask that weighs 24 pounds. But tucked away in a room called the Treasury was a simple wooden box. It did not have gold on the outside. It looked very normal compared to everything else. Inside that box were two tiny coffins. Each one was only about 19 inches long. These tiny coffins were carved from single pieces of wood and held two small mummies. For a long time, people did not talk about them. They were just seen as a sad part of the story. These were two baby girls who were never born. One was about 5 months along, and the other was about 9 months along. They were the children of King Tut, and they were buried right at his feet. The story of these tiny babies stayed quiet for a long time. They were sent to a medical school in Cairo and kept in storage for almost 100 years. Most people who visited the museum never even knew they existed. But in 2008, things began to change. The people in charge of Egypt's history decided to use DNA to solve the mysteries of the past. They built a lab that cost $5 million just to look at the royal mummies. They wanted to know if these babies really belonged to Tut, or if they were just placed there for a ritual. Testing ancient DNA is very hard because it breaks into tiny pieces over thousands of years. It is like trying to read a book that has been shredded into a million bits. Also, people have been touching these mummies for a long time, so there is a lot of new DNA mixed in with the old stuff. It was a big risk to even try. The scientists were very careful. They used special tools to get samples from the bones of the tiny mummies. They needed to find 16 specific markers to prove who the father was. When the results came back in 2010, they were exact. The DNA from both tiny girls matched the DNA from King Tut. He was definitely their father. This was a human tragedy that happened over 3,000 years ago. But the DNA showed something else that was even more important. It showed that the babies had health problems that were passed down from their parents. One of the girls had a spine that was not straight, and a shoulder that was in the wrong place. These were the same kinds of problems that King Tut had himself. This was not just a sad story about two lost babies. It was a clue to a much bigger secret about the whole royal family. Wait, there is a wild theory that these babies were not actually dying of natural causes. Some people think they were part of a ritual to give King Tut extra life in the next world. They think that by burying his own blood with him, he could be reborn as a perfect god. But the DNA suggests something much more down to earth. The truth is that their bodies were just too weak to survive. The family tree was getting tighter and tighter with every generation. The pharaohs thought they were making themselves into gods, but they were actually making themselves very sick. It is like they were trying to win a game with rules that were set against them from the start. The way these babies were buried shows how much they meant to the king. They were nested in coffins that were covered in gold foil on the inside. This was a royal burial for children who never had a chance to live. But the names on the coffins were strange. They had the name of the king's grandmother on them. This made people wonder if there was a mix-up, or if someone was trying to hide who the babies really were. The DNA proved the truth, but it also started a new search. If these babies were so sick, where did the sickness come from? To find that out, the scientists had to look at King Tut himself. They had to see what was hiding behind that famous gold mask. Everything we thought we knew about the healthy young king was about to be proven wrong by his own bones. Truth behind the golden mask. Most people think of King Tut as a strong leader, but his mummy tells a very different story. He was not a warrior who led his army into battle. He was a young man who lived in a lot of pain. When scientists put his body through a scanner in 2005, they found a long list of health issues. First, he had a very bad foot. His left foot was twisted and some of the bones were literally dying. This is called a club foot. He would not have been able to walk very far without help. This explains why Howard Carter found over 130 walking sticks in the tomb. These were not just for show. Many of the sticks had marks on the bottom that showed they were used a lot. The handles were worn down from the king leaning on them every day. He was a 19-year-old boy who needed a cane just to get around his own palace. The scanners also showed that the king had a hole in the roof of his mouth. This made it hard for him to talk clearly and easy for him to get sick. His spine was also curved, which means he probably stood with a slouch. He was about 5 feet and 6 inches tall, but he was very thin and frail. Even in the pictures on his tomb walls, he is often shown sitting down. While other pharaohs are shown standing tall and hunting lions, Tut is shown sitting in a chair while his wife hands him flowers. He was a king who was broken from the moment he was born. The DNA tests even found that he had a very bad case of malaria. This is a sickness you get from mosquitoes that causes high fevers. His body was already weak, and then he broke his leg very badly. In those days, there were no medicines to stop infections. Now, here is where it gets really strange. Some people think that King Tut was not even human in the way we understand it. Because of the way his head was shaped and his strange body, there are theories that his family was actually from somewhere else. Of course, most scientists say this is just because of the inbreeding, but when you look at the statues of his father, Akhenaten, the features are so weird that they look like something out of a movie. Long, thin faces, huge hips, and eyes that look like they belong to a different species. Could it be that the pharaohs were trying to look like aliens on purpose? Or were they just so sick that their bones were changing shape? Whatever the reason, the result was a young man who could barely stand up under the weight of his own gold jewelry. The scanners also found something very interesting about his passing. For a long time, people thought his advisor took him out to take the throne. But the scanners showed that the hole in his head was made by the people who fixed his body after he passed. They did that to take out his brain. The real reason he passed away was likely a mix of his broken leg and the malaria. His body just could not fight off the sickness anymore. He was the last of his family line, and he was fading away at a very young age. His marriage was also part of this tragedy. He was married to a girl named Akhenaten. She was his half-sister. They were both children when they were put on the throne. They were trying to have a baby to keep the family line going, but their genes were too similar. The 2 babies found in the tomb were the only children they ever had. Because the king and queen were so closely related, the babies were born with the same problems. Their blood was too thin, and their bodies were too weak. This is a common problem when people in the same family have children together. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs did this because they wanted to keep the bloodline pure. They thought they were gods, so they only wanted to marry other people who they thought were gods. But instead of making the family stronger, it made them weaker and weaker until they could not survive anymore. The golden mask hides the face of a boy who was the victim of his own family's rules. The tragedy did not end with the king's death because his young queen was left all alone in a very dangerous place. Doomed blood of the Sun King. The DNA team found that King Tut's parents were also brother and sister. This was the big secret that the pharaohs tried to hide. Tut's father was a man named Akhenaten. He was a very strange king who tried to change everything in Egypt. He told the people they could only worship one god, the sun. He closed all the old temples and fired the priests. He even built a brand new city in the middle of the desert and moved everyone there. This made a lot of people angry. After he passed away, the people who came after him tried to erase his name from history. They smashed his statues and chiseled his face off the walls. They wanted everyone to forget he ever lived. But his DNA lived on in his son, King Tut. The scientists tested a mummy found in a tomb called KV-55. For a long time, nobody knew who it was. The name had been scratched off the coffin. But the DNA showed that this man was the son of Queen T and the father of King Tut. This had to be Akhenaten. Then they tested another mummy called the Younger Lady. She was found in a different tomb lying on the floor. She had no name and her face was damaged. The DNA results were a total shock. She was the mother of King Tut, but she was also the full sister of Akhenaten. This means Tut's parents had the exact same mother and father. This kind of close relationship is why Tut was born with so many health problems. It is also why his own daughters were never born alive. The family was destroying itself from the inside out. Wait, let's talk about the city of Amarna for a second. It was built in a place where nothing else grew. Some people think Akhenaten moved there because he was hiding something even bigger than a new religion. There are theories that he was trying to create a new kind of human race through this inbreeding. He thought that by keeping the blood within the family, he could reach a level of power that no one else had. But instead of power, he got a family that was falling apart. His city was abandoned almost as soon as he passed away. The sand covered it up, and it was lost for thousands of years. It is like the earth itself wanted to hide what had happened there. Things get even crazier when you look at the art from that time. Akhenaten had himself drawn with a very long face, wide hips, and a big stomach. People used to think the artists were just being creative, but now we know that he probably really looked like that. The inbreeding in the family had caused their bodies to change in strange ways. They had long heads and thin necks. They thought these were signs that they were like the sun god, but they were actually signs of a genetic disaster. Hands down, this was the most sick royal family in history. They were so obsessed with being pure that they became defective. King Tut was the final result of hundreds of years of this behavior. When Tut passed away, his wife, Akhenaten, was in big trouble. She was only about 19 years old and had no children to take the throne. She was terrified of the men in the palace who wanted to be king. We have a letter she wrote to a king in another country. She begged him to send one of his sons to marry her. She said she did not want to marry a servant. But the prince he sent was taken out on the road before he ever got to Egypt. The young queen was forced to marry an old man named A, who had been her husband's advisor. After that, she completely disappears from history. We do not even know where she is buried. The entire family line just vanished into the sand. The world they tried to build was wiped away by the people who took over after them. Last breath of a fallen empire. After the time of King Tut, the leaders of Egypt tried to act like his family never existed. They went back to the old gods and the old temples. They called Akhenaten the heretic king and Tut the forgotten pharaoh. They thought that by erasing their names they could fix the damage that had been done. But the DNA of the two babies tells the real story. It shows that the end of the dynasty was not just about politics or religion. It was about biology. The family had become so weak that they simply could not go on. The 18th dynasty had been the most powerful time in Egypt's history. They had built the great temples at Karnak and Luxor. They had conquered many lands. But it all ended with a boy who needed a cane to walk and two babies who never saw the sun. The story of the babies is the most honest part of the whole history. In a world where every pharaoh lied about how great they were, these two tiny mummies show the truth. They show the pain and the loss that happened behind the palace walls. Science has allowed us to see past the gold and the lies. We can now see that the pharaohs were just humans who made very bad choices. They tried to be gods, but nature proved them wrong. What most people do not realize is that the discovery of these babies is what finally solved the puzzle. Without their DNA, we would still be guessing about who Tut's parents were. They provided the final piece of the map. Here is a theory that will blow your mind. Some people think that the reason King Tut's tomb was so small and hidden was that the people who buried him wanted him to be forgotten. They didn't want anyone to find his mummy or his sick family. They were ashamed of what had happened to the royal bloodline. They buried him with all that gold just to keep the gods happy. But they put him in a tiny hole in the ground and hoped the sand would swallow him up. And it almost worked. If it weren't for a lucky break in 1922, we would never have known about the tragic end of this family. The thing is, we are still finding new things in Egypt every year. There are still tombs that have not been opened and secrets that are still buried. But it is hard to imagine a discovery bigger than this one. It teaches us that even the most powerful people in the world cannot escape their own genes. The pharaohs thought they could live forever by building pyramids and tombs. But their real legacy was left in the tiny bones of 2 children who were almost forgotten. Today, those babies are no longer a medical curiosity. They are the witnesses to the fall of an empire. They remind us that history is not just about big dates and wars. It is about families and the tragedies they face. The secret Egypt tried to bury is now out in the light. We know about the pain, the sickness, and the doomed bloodline. King Tut is no longer just a face on a gold mask. He is a real person who suffered and lost everything. The mystery of the mummified babies has been solved, but it leaves us with a very deep question. The pharaohs spent all their time trying to be immortal, but they ended up destroying the very thing they were trying to save. Their story is a warning about what happens when people think they are above the laws of nature. The gold still shines in the museum, but the real story is much more human. Are we still missing a key detail that could change everything again? See, in the quiet halls of Cairo's museums and the bright, clean rooms of genetic labs, the story of King Tut's doomed family continues to come apart. This is thanks to new breakthroughs in DNA technology that can cut through thousands of years of ancient secrets. Long after the studies in 2010 first proved that Akhenaten was Tut's father and showed how much the family was marrying their own relatives, scientists have gone even further. Using tools that work like a high-tech pair of scissors, they have mapped out not just who the parents were, but the exact changes in the genes that caused an empire to fall. A new look at the baby mummies in 2025, those sad daughters found in tiny coffins, showed something shocking. Scientists found small switches in the DNA that turn on when a person is under a lot of stress. These switches made the genetic problems even worse. In healthy ancestors like Tut's grandfather, these switches stayed off. But in the royal family of Amarna, they flared up like a fire. This turned the royal blood into something that was actually harmful. Picture the scene in the fancy palaces. The king and his sister-wife were having children whose very DNA made them too weak to survive. Their own bodies were a battlefield of bad genes. These babies were not just small details in a big story. Their genetic maps, taken with special lasers that do not hurt the mummies, showed they had the same clubfoot as King Tut. But it was even worse for them. One had a problem where the brain did not form right, and the other had a spine that did not close. These are problems linked to not having enough vitamins, made much worse because the parents were so closely related. New scans in 2025 using smart computers estimated that the babies were lost between 5 and 9 months into the pregnancy. This suggests that the queen, who was Tut's half-sister, went through many heartbreaks. But here is the mind-bending twist. Some signs in the DNA hint that there might have been some outside blood from a different country. This might have given Tut just enough strength to rule for 19 years. Some people whisper about a cover-up. They think the priests were so scared by the baby's health problems that they buried them as a way to say sorry to the gods, rather than as loved children. Looking past the babies, new tests on the father's mummy in 2023 confirmed he was definitely Tut's dad. But his DNA showed that his body was aging much faster than normal. This could have been from stress, or even from spending too much time in the sun during his religious rituals. The heretic king was not just a man who changed the religion. His DNA showed his body was attacking itself. He had a condition that made his face long and his body shaped like a woman's. It was not a sign from a god, but a sign of sickness. In the burning heat of the desert city, these genetic problems grew worse. Supercomputer tests in 2026 show that with the family being so closely related, the collapse of the dynasty was a mathematical certainty. But the shadows of this family go even deeper. In 2025, workers found pieces of an old jar that linked to the king's oldest daughter. DNA from these pieces matched the family profile and suggested she had a child who vanished from all records. Was this a sick child who was sent away? Some wild theories suggest this was a missing link to the next group of kings. Or maybe outside blood from a foreign princess helped for a little while until the family started marrying each other again. There are even rumors that the famous Queen Nefertiti was found in 2022, and her bones show the same strange face shapes as Tut. This adds fire to the theory that she was his aunt, or even his stepmother. Scientists also looked at proteins in Tut's bone marrow in 2024. They found proof of malaria, a deadly sickness from mosquitoes. This was likely the final blow, along with his broken leg from a chariot accident. But it was not just bad luck. Being so inbred meant his immune system was too weak to fight back. Imagine the boy king, holding his cane and shaking with fever in his palace, while people around him were already planning for his end. One controversial theory even suggests that enemies might have sent infected mosquitoes into the palace as a secret way to take him out. The story of this cursed family still matters today. As we learn how to fix DNA, experts warn that we might make the same mistakes. They worry about people today trying to make perfect children and ignoring the dangers. In the labs in Egypt, scientists are finding a plague genome in the bones of people from that time. This suggests that a double epidemic of malaria and the plague might have wiped out the royal court. Even the king's visions of the sun god might have been caused by bad grain that made people see things. Yet, amid all the doom, we see a human side. Tut's DNA shows a rare gene for empathy, which might be why he tried to bring back the old gods and make peace. The babies, who never got to live, are a sad reminder of what happens when people try too hard to be special. As the machines in Cairo continue to work, the ancient coffins keep telling their story. This was a family that was not just cursed, but deeply human. They were the ones who built their own downfall, and their bones are a warning for everyone else. The Golden City shows that the king's family line was failing long before the end. Hidden chambers and the shadow of the queen. Under the hot sun of the desert, where the Nile River flows toward forever, the dirt is finally giving up the secrets of the Sun King. In April 2025, a famous team announced they found a lost Golden City. This was a huge town that was used by Tut's father and grandfather. It has been buried under the sand for thousands of years and is in great shape. They found bakeries with the ovens still there, and workshops making sun charms. They even found royal seals with King Tut's name on them from when he was just a little prince. But there are darker things there too. They found graves where the people had the same health problems as the royal family. This suggests that the rules about who could marry whom were hurting everyone, not just the kings. Further east, workers in 2025 found a plague area in the city. Tests on the bones showed that people were not eating well and had a hard life. Some people think there was a solar curse. This theory says that because the king made everyone worship in open temples under the hot sun, the radiation caused their skin to change and made their genetic problems worse. They even found a child mummy with a curved spine just like Tut's. The child was buried quickly with pots that asked the sun god for mercy. It seems the whole city was suffering along with their leader. In the Valley of the Kings, a team in 2023 found a tomb that might belong to Tut's wife, Queen Akhenaten. The walls show her asking a foreign prince to come and marry her because she had no sons. Inside, they found jars that held the same DNA as the two babies found in Tut's tomb. This suggests she had even more children who did not survive. Was this tomb a secret place for babies who were born sick? In 2026, special radar showed that there might be even more hidden rooms near Tut's tomb. People think these could belong to Nefertiti, but the work has slowed down because of politics. Deep in another part of the valley, the tomb of Tut's grandfather was reopened in 2024. They found side rooms where the heretic king's name had been scratched off. Tests on the bones found there show the same strange body shapes that Akhenaten had. In 2025, they found a gold charm asking for the ability to have children. This was likely from Tut's grandmother. Her DNA shows she was from a different area, which brought in some fresh blood for a short time. But it was not enough to stop the family from falling apart later on. The DNA from these tiny babies proved that the royal family of Egypt was hiding a dark and tragic secret. Did the pharaohs realize they were destroying their own bloodline? Or did they truly believe they were becoming gods? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe for more mysteries from the ancient world.